everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm your name, and today, man, I've got something wild to share with you. This isn't just another spooky story, this is what happened to me, for real, at the Wheatsheaf Pub in West Boldon. I'm still shaking just thinking about it, and trust me, you're gonna want to stick around for this one. It's got everything ghostly giggles, angry shadows, and a building that felt like it wanted me dead. If you're into real-life hauntings, that'll keep you up at night. Hit that subscribe button right now, smash the like button, and don't forget to ring that bell so you never miss a story like this. All right, let's get into it. Grab a blanket, turn off the lights, and here's what went down that day. The haunted Wheatsheaf Pub, a battle between spirits and the living all right. So this is my story about the day I spent at the Wheatsheaf Pub in West Boldon, and I'm still shaking just thinking about it. It was back in 2004. Not long after David and his partner reopened the place side. Heard the rumors about Clive getting shoved off the balcony the year before, but I figured it was just pub talk. You know, locals exaggerating a drunk guy's fall. I was there to help a buddy repaint the upstairs corridor. Nothing fancy, just a quick cash gig. The pub itself looked rough, peeling red paint on the outside. Cracked windows boarded up from when it was abandoned, and this sagging roof that made it feel like the whole building was tired. Inside, it smelled like stale beer and damp wood, with these old wooden beams crisscrossing the ceiling, all warped and stained. The bar downstairs had mismatched stools and a dusty jukebox that hadn't worked in years, while the upstairs was just a narrow hallway with a couple of tiny rooms and that creepy bathroom at the end. I didn't think much of it at first, just another rundown pub with character, right? But the second I stepped in, something felt off, like the air was too thick, pressing down on me. I brushed it off as nerves, grabbed my paint cans, and headed upstairs with my buddy, Mike. We were joking around, blasting some music from his little portable speaker, trying to ignore how quiet the place was otherwise. That's when I first noticed the faintest sound of footsteps echoing down the hall, like someone was pacing behind us. I didn't say anything to Mike at first, because I thought maybe I was imagining it old buildings creak, right? But those footsteps kept going, heavy and deliberate, like boots stomping on the floorboards, even though we were the only ones up there. I turned around quick, expecting to see David or one of the staff messing with us. But the hallway was empty, just this long stretch of faded wallpaper curling at the edges and a couple of bare light bulbs flickering overhead. The paint cans in my hands felt heavier all of a sudden, and I got this chill down my neck, like someone was standing right behind me, breathing cold air on my skin. Mike didn't hear it. He was too busy slathering paint over the cigarette burns on the walls, humming along to his tunes. I tried to focus, dipping my brush in the paint, but every time I moved, those footsteps seemed to match my pace, stopping when I stopped, starting when I started. I finally muttered something to Mike like, "You hear that?" And he just laughed, saying the place was probably settling or some crap like that. But I knew it wasn't the building. I could feel it. This weight in the air, like something was watching us, waiting. The hallway felt tighter, the shadows stretching longer, even though it was midday and light was spilling through the cracked window at the end. I kept glancing at that bathroom door, slightly ajar, and swore I saw it twitch like it moved an inch on its own. My stomach flipped, but I told myself to chill out. It was just a drafty old pub, nothing more. So, we kept painting, but I couldn't shake that feeling like the pub itself was alive, messing with me. About an hour in, Mike decided he needed a smoke break and headed downstairs, leaving me alone with my paint roller and that damn hallway. The footsteps stopped when he left, and for a second, I thought maybe I'd imagined it, until I heard this low, creaky groan, like the floorboards were bending under something heavy. I froze, roller dripping paint onto my boots, and looked down the hall toward the bathroom. That door was wide open now, even though I'd swear it was only cracked before. The light bulb above it started buzzing, flickering like it was about to die, and I got this sick feeling in my gut, like I was being pulled toward that room. I didn't want to go near it. Everything in me screamed to just grab my stuff and bolt, but my dumb ass decided to peek inside, figuring I'd prove to myself it was nothing. The bathroom was tiny, just a chipped sink, a cloudy mirror, and a toilet that looked like it hadn't been cleaned in years. The tiles were yellowed, some cracked, and there was this faint smell, like wet dirt mixed with something sour. I stepped in, and the air got colder, so cold I could see my breath puffing out in little clouds. That's when I saw Aitor, thought I did in the mirror. I was just glancing at my reflection, trying to shake off the creeps, when something shifted behind me. It was quick, like a shadow darting across the glass. But when I whipped around, nothing was there, just the empty doorway and the hallway beyond. My heart was hammering now, and I told myself it was a trick of the light, those flickering bulbs playing with my head. But then I heard Ida giggle, soft and high-pitched, like a kid's laugh, coming from somewhere in the room. I checked under the sink, behind the door, even stuck my head out into the hall. Nothing. The sound stopped, but my hands were shaking so bad I dropped my paintbrush, splattering white all over the tiles. I looked back at the mirror, and for a split second, I swear I saw her, a little girl, pale as hell, with dark hair hanging over her face, standing right behind me. I yelled and stumbled back, slamming into the sink, but when I blinked, she was gone. The mirror just showed me again, sweaty and freaked out, my breath fogging up the glass. I couldn't tell if it was real or if I was losing it, but that giggle echoed in my ears, and I knew I wasn't alone in there. The pub felt like it was closing in, like the walls were leaning toward me, and all I could think was, I needed to get the hell out of that bathroom. I bolted out of that bathroom like my life depended on it, my boots slipping on the paint I'd dropped, and I didn't stop until I was back in the hallway with my rollers still lying there on the floor. My chest was tight, and I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting that little girl to be standing there, staring at me with those blank eyes I'd seen in the mirror. The hallway was quiet again, no footsteps, no giggles, just the hum of Mike's speaker still playing downstairs, faint and tinny. I tried to calm down, picking up the roller and wiping my sweaty hands on my jeans, telling myself I'd just spooked myself silly. Old places like the Wheatsheaf have a way of getting under your skin. You know, all those creaky boards and dark corners, it's easy to start seeing things. But then I noticed something weird. The paint we'd put on the walls was dripping, not drying like it should have been. It was running down in slow, thick streaks, pooling on the floor like blood, even though it was just cheap white latex. I touched it, and it was cold freezing, actually like it had been sitting in a fridge. That's when I realized the whole hallway felt icy, like someone had cranked the AC to Arctic levels, even though it was a warm day outside. I didn't have time to process that before the footsteps started up again, louder this time, stomping down the hall like whoever it was wanted me to hear them. They were coming from the direction of the bathroom, and I could feel the vibrations through the floorboards rattling up into my legs. I backed up, my back hitting the wall, and watched as the shadows at the end of the hall seemed to twist, like something big was moving through them. I couldn't see anything clear, just this blurry shape, tall and hunched, like a guy who'd been bent over too long. My mouth went dry, and I yelled out, "Mike, you up here?" hoping it was him messing with me, even though I knew he was still downstairs. No answer, just those footsteps getting closer, thudding so hard the light bulbs swayed overhead. I grabbed my phone to call him, but the screen flickered and died, even though it had been fully charged when I got there. The air got heavy, like it was pressing on my chest, and I swear I smelled smoke, like old tobacco or something burning mixed with that damp, earthy stink from the bathroom. I didn't wait to see what was coming. I turned and ran for the stairs, paint cans clattering behind me, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear anything else. The Wheatsheaf wasn't just old, it was pissed off, and I was starting to think it didn't want me there. I hit the stairs running, taking them two at a time, and almost tripped over my own feet trying to get downstairs where Mike was. The whole way down, I could hear those footsteps chasing me, booming like they were right on my heels. But when I glanced back, the stairwell was empty, just dark and dusty, with cobwebs swaying in the corners. I burst into the bar area, panting like crazy, and found Mike leaning against the counter, puffing on his cigarette, totally oblivious. He looked up, smirking, and said, "What's got you all worked up, mate?" I tried to explain the footsteps, the girl in the mirror, the paint dripping like it was alive, but my words came out all jumbled, and he just laughed, saying I'd been sniffing too much paint thinner. The bar felt warmer than upstairs, with sunlight streaming through the grimy windows, lighting up the scratched-up tables and the old dartboard hanging crooked on the wall. But even down there, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The air still had that weird heaviness, like the pub was holding its breath. I grabbed a water from behind the counter, my hand still trembling, and tried to act normal. But I kept glancing at the stairs, waiting for whatever was up there to come down after me. Mike stubbed out his cigarette and said we should finish up quick. He didn't believe me, but he could tell I was rattled. We headed back upstairs together, him leading the way with his usual chill vibe while I dragged my feet, every step feeling like I was walking into a trap. The hallway looked the same, paint cans scattered where I'd dropped them. The walls still streaked with that runny white mess butt. It was dead quiet now. No footsteps, no nothing. Mike started joking about how I'd probably seen a rat or something, but then he stopped mid-sentence, his eyes going wide. I followed his gaze and saw it. The bathroom door was shut tight now, even though I'd left it wide open when I ran out. We hadn't heard it close, no slam, no creak, nothing, and there was no one else up there with us. The paint on the floor near the door had smeared into weird shapes, almost like handprints, but too big and messed up to be ours. My stomach dropped, and Mike muttered, "What the hell?" under his breath. I wanted to tell him to forget it, to just grab our stuff and leave. But before I could, the door started rattling, like something was shaking it from the inside, hard. The sound was sharp and violent, echoing down the hall, and I felt this wave of dread hit me so strong, I almost puked right there. That rattling door was like a punch to the gut, and I just stood there, frozen, watching it shake like something was trying to bust out. Mike, who'd been all cocky a second ago, went pale, his cigarette falling from his fingers onto the floorboards. The noise got louder, this frantic banging now, like fists pounding on the wood, and I could see the hinges straining, dust puffing out from the frame. I wanted to run again, but my legs felt like jelly, and Mike grabbed my arm, whispering, "Mate, we need to get out of here." The air in the hallway turned freezing again, my breath clouding up in front of me, and that smoke smell was back stronger now, choking me like someone was burning trash right next to us. The light bulbs flickered wildly, casting these jerky shadows that made the walls look like they were moving. I swear I heard that giggle again, faint under the banging, like the little girl was still in there, watching us lose it. Then, just as quick as it started, the rattling stopped dead silence, like someone flipped a switch. The door didn't open, didn't budge, just sat there, mocking us. Mike let go of my arm and took a shaky step toward the door, muttering something about checking it out, but I yanked him back so hard he almost fell. "Are you nuts?" I hissed, my voice cracking. No way was I letting him near that thing. I didn't care if it was quiet now. Whatever was in there wasn't done with us. The hallway felt smaller, the ceiling lower, like the pub was shrinking around us, and I could hear my own heartbeat thumping in my ears. Mike looked at me, then back at the door, and I could tell he was spooked too, even if he wouldn't admit it. The paint streaks on the walls were worse now. Some of them looked like words, smudged and runny, but I couldn't make them out, just enough to know they weren't random. That earthy, sour smell from the bathroom was seeping out again, mixing with the smoke. And it hit me that this wasn't just some creepy old building, it was something alive, something angry. I grabbed my bag, slinging it over my shoulder, and told Mike we were done, job or no job. He didn't argue this time, just nodded, and we started for the stairs. But then I heard a low, growling voice right behind me saying, "Get out." It wasn't Mikai. Turned and saw his mouth was shut, his eyes huge. The voice came from the air itself, rough and deep, like it was scraped out of the walls. That voice stopped me cold, like someone had dumped ice water down my spine, and I spun around, expecting to see some guy standing there. But it was just the empty hallway staring back at me. Mike heard it, too. I could tell by the way he was clutching his paint roller like a weapon, his knuckles white. The words hung there, "Get out," echoing in my head, even though the air was silent again. And I felt this push, like an invisible hand shoving me toward the stairs. The pub wasn't just creepy anymore. It was mad, like it hated us being there. And I wasn't about to argue with it. I stumbled forward, grabbing Mike's sleeve, and we bolted for the stairs, the floor creaking under us, like it was groaning in protest. That smoke smell was so thick now I could taste it, bitter and stale. And the cold followed us, nipping at my heels. I didn't look back, I couldn't, but I swore I felt eyes on me, drilling into my back. And that giggle floated up again, faint and mocking. We hit the bar area, and the warmth down there didn't feel safe anymore. It just made the chill from upstairs stand out more, like the pub was split in two. Mike was swearing under his breath, saying stuff like, "What the hell was that?" over and over. But I didn't have answers, just this knot of fear, twisting tighter in my chest. The bar looked normal enough, the sunlight still slanting through the windows, the jukebox still dead in the corner, but it didn't feel right. The air down here was heavy too, like it was waiting for something, and I kept catching these little movements out of the corner of my eye, like shadows shifting where they shouldn't. I grabbed my jacket off a stool, ready to ditch everything and run. when I heard it again, that growl. Get out. But this time it was louder, like it was coming from the walls themselves. Mike jumped, knocking over a chair, and we both looked around, trying to pin it down. But it was everywhere, rumbling through the floor, the ceiling, even the bar counter. The windows rattled, just for a second, like something huge had slammed into the building. And then I saw it, a handprint, big and smeared, appearing on the dusty bar top, right where I'd been leaning a minute ago. It wasn't mine, too wide, too rough, and it wasn't there before. My throat closed up, and I couldn't even scream, just pointed at it, my hand shaking like crazy. Mike saw it too, and that's when we both knew this wasn't a joke anymore. Something in the Wheatsheaf wanted us gone, bad. That handprint on the bar top was like a slap in the face, and I couldn't take my eyes off it. Those smudged fingers, way bigger than mine, pressed into the dust like someone had just been there. Mike was freaking out now, backing away from the counter, muttering, "No way, no way," like a broken record. I wanted to say something, anything, but my mouth was so dry I could barely swallow, and that growl kept echoing in my head. Get out, like it was burned into my brain. The pub felt alive, pulsing around us, and I noticed the shadows in the room were moving against, lighting across the walls, stretching toward us, even though the sun hadn't shifted outside. The handprint started to fade, like it was sinking back into the wood, but then another one appeared, closer to us, and I swear I heard a thud, like a fist hitting the counter right where it showed up. My legs were screaming to run, but I was stuck, staring, while that sour, earthy smell rolled in again, so strong it made my eyes water. The jukebox in the corner flickered, its lights blinking on for a second. Even though it wasn't plugged in, and I felt this pull, like the pub was daring me to stay. Mike finally snapped out of it, grabbing my arm and yelling, "Let's go now!" And that broke the spell. I stumbled after him toward the front door, my boots slipping on the uneven floor. The air got thicker as we moved, like we were wading through mud, and that giggle came back, louder this time, bouncing off the walls like the little girl was running circles around us. I risked a look back and wished I hadn't up on the stairs. Just at the edge of the landing, I saw her, that pale figure from the mirror, standing there with her head tilted, watching us. Her dress was dirty, torn at the hem, and her hair hung over her face, but I could feel her staring, even without seeing her eyes. The growl hit again. Get out! And this time, it was deafening, shaking the whole room, making the bottles behind the bar clink together. Something crashed upstairs, loud and sharp, like a chair smashing into a wall, and the lights flickered hard, plunging us into shadows for a split second. Mike yanked the door open, and we spilled out into the daylight, the warm air outside hitting me like a wave. I collapsed onto the pavement, gasping, my hands scraped raw from catching myself, and looked back at the Wheatsheaf. Its sagging roof and peeling paint looked quiet now, like nothing had happened, but I knew better. Out on the pavement, I was sucking in air like I'd just run a marathon, my shirt soaked with sweat, even though it had been freezing inside. Mike was pacing, hands on his head, saying stuff like, "That wasn't real. That can't be real." But I could tell he was shaken. He kept glancing back at the pub like it might come after us. The Wheatsheaf sat there, silent, its windows dark and empty, but I couldn't shake the feeling it was watching us, waiting for us to try going back in. The street outside was normal cars rolling by, a lady walking her dog across the road, but it felt wrong, like the pub had sucked all the life out of me and left this hollow pit in my chest. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, and I could still smell that mix of smoke and dirt on my clothes, clinging to me like a bad memory. I wanted to get up, walk away, pretend it was over, but my legs were like lead, and every time I blinked, I saw that girl on the stairs, her tilted head, her silent stare. The growl was still ringing in my ears, low and mean, and I kept hearing that giggle, faint now, like she was laughing at us from inside. I looked at Mike and said, "We're not going back in there, right?" And he just nodded, fast, like he didn't trust himself to speak. We sat there for a bit, catching our breath, and I started noticing little things like how the paint cans we'd left upstairs were still in there, along with my bag and Mike's speaker, but neither of us cared enough to go get them. The pub's front door was still cracked open from when we ran out, and I could see a sliver of the bar inside those scratched tables, that dusty counter with the handprints, but it was dead quiet now. No crashing, no voices. It didn't feel like a win, though. It felt like the place was just biding its time. I pulled up my phone to check the time, and it was back on full battery, like it hadn't died upstairs, and it said 3:17 p.m. even though it felt like we'd been in there for hours. Mike lit another cigarette, his hands trembling so bad he dropped the match twice, and I could see he was trying to play it cool, but his eyes kept darting to the door. Then we heard it a single, loud thud from inside, like something heavy dropped on the floor, and the door swung shut on its own, slamming so hard the frame rattled. I jumped up, my heart racing again, and Mike cursed, tossing his cigarette like it had burned him. We didn't say anything, just stared at each other. Then at the pub, its red paint peeling like old skin. And I knew right then we weren't the only ones who'd been in there that day. Whatever it was, it had let us go for now. After that door slammed, I couldn't just sit there anymore. My nerves were shot, and I needed to move, to put some distance between me and that damn pub. Mike was on the same page. He grabbed his keys from his pocket and said, "Let's get out of here, mate." His voice all shaky, like he was still half expecting something to come crashing out after us. We started walking toward his van, parked a few yards down the street, and I kept looking over my shoulder at the Wheatsheaf, its sagging outline looking way too still, like it was pretending to sleep. The air out here was warm, normal, with that faint smell of petrol and cut grass you'd expect on a day like that. But I could still feel the cold from inside clinging to me, like it had soaked into my bones. My scraped up hands stung, and my head was pounding. But all I could think about was that girl on the stairs and that voice telling us to get out, like it wasn't just a warning, but a promise. I climbed into the van, slamming the door harder than I meant to, and Mike started the engine, peeling out so fast the tires squealed. I didn't care if we looked like idiots. I just wanted to be anywhere but there. Driving away, I kept checking the side mirror, half expecting to see something chasing who's maybe that tall, hunched, shadow-eyed, glimpsed upstairs. Or worse, that little girl standing in the road, waving. But the street stayed empty, just houses and parked cars sliding by, and the Wheatsheaf shrank smaller and smaller until it was out of sight. Mike didn't say much, just gripped the wheel tight, his jaw clenched, and I could tell he was replaying it all in his head too. I tried to laugh it off, saying something dumb like, "Guess we're not getting paid for that," but it fell flat, and my voice sounded hollow even to me. The van's radio was off, and the silence between us was heavy, broken only by the hum of the engine and the occasional bump in the road. I rubbed my hands together, still feeling that icy chill, and noticed a streak of paint on my white, runny, like the stuff that had dripped on the walls upstairs. It hit me then. We'd left everything behind, tools, bags, all of it tanned. I didn't care. No amount of cash was worth going back into that place. I leaned my head against the window, the glass cool against my skin, and tried to tell myself it was over. But deep down, I knew the Wheatsheaf wasn't done with me. I could still hear that growl in the back of my mind, low and waiting. Mike dropped me off at my place about 20 minutes later, and I could tell he was itching to get home himself. He barely said goodbye, just gave me a quick nod before speeding off down the street. I stood there on my doorstep, keys in hand, feeling like I'd aged 10 years in one afternoon. The sun was still up, kids were playing somewhere down the road, and everything looked so normal it almost made me mad. Like, how could the world just keep going after what we'd been through? My flat was small, just a cramped living room and a kitchen that smelled like last night's takeaway. But stepping inside didn't feel safe like it usually did. I locked the door behind me, double-checking it, and tossed my jacket on the couch, that paint streak still glaring at me from the sleeve. My hands were still shaky, and I went straight for the sink, splashing cold water on my face, trying to wash off that smoky, earthy stink that wouldn't leave me. But when I looked in the mirror, my eyes were bloodshot, and for a split second, I thought I saw her again, that little girl flickering in the reflection behind me. I spun around, heart in my throat, but it was just my empty hallway, the light buzzing faintly overhead. I tried to chill out, plopping onto the couch with a beer, but my mind wouldn't shut off. Every creak in the flat made me jump. Every shadow looked like it was moving. I kept replaying it all. The footsteps, the handprints, that voice growling at us to get out, and that girl staring from the stairs. The Wheatsheaf wasn't just haunted, it was like it hated us, like we'd stepped on its turf, and it wanted us to pay. I pulled out my phone and texted Mike, just a quick "You okay?" But he didn't reply right away, and that made my stomach twist even more. The beer didn't help. It just sat heavy in my gut, and I ended up pacing around, checking the windows like something might be out there watching. I could still feel that cold air on my neck, hear that giggle echoing, and it hit me I didn't just leave the pub. It followed me, like a stain I couldn't scrub off. I sat back down, staring at the wall, and noticed my breath was fogging up again, just faintly, even though the heat was on. My hands went clammy, and I told myself it was nothing, just my head messing with me. But then I heard it a single, soft thud, like something heavy hitting the floor in my kitchen. I froze, beer bottle slipping in my grip, and realized this wasn't overknocked by a long shot. That thud in the kitchen snapped me out of my daze, and I sat there, gripping the beer bottle so tight I thought it might crack. It was just one sound, sharp and heavy, like a chair tipping over, but it was enough to make my skin crawl all over again. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a plate I'd left on the counter had slid off, but my flat was tiny, and I knew damn well I hadn't left anything out. The living room was dim now, the sun dipping lower outside, and the shadows stretched across the carpet, looking too long, too dark. I stood up slow, my knees shaky, and peered around the corner into the kitchen. Just a small space with a chipped counter, a sink full of dishes, and a flickering bulb overhead. Nothing was out of place, no fallen plates, no tipped chairs, but the air felt wrong cold again, like it had been upstairs at the Wheatsheaf. I stepped in, my socks quiet on the tiles, and that smoky smell hit me, faint but there, curling up my nose like a warning. I checked the window shut to tan the back door, locked but my breath was fogging up in little puffs, and I couldn't shake the feeling I wasn't alone. I turned to head back to the couch, figuring I'd just ignore it and crash early, when I heard it again, another thud, this time louder, coming from the hallway by my bedroom. My heart slammed against my ribs, and I grabbed a butter knife from the counter, feeling stupid but needing something in my hand. The hallway was narrow, just a strip of peeling paint and a single bulb that buzzed like it was dying, and I crept toward the sound, every step making my stomach twist tighter. The bedroom door was cracked open. I never left it like that tanned. I could see my messy bed inside, sheets tangled from the night before. I pushed the door wider, the hinges creaking loud enough to make me flinch, and scanned the room. Nothing, just my clothes on the floor, a half-empty water glass on the nightstand, and the wardrobe in the corner with its door shut tight. But that cold was stronger here, seeping into my fingers, and I swear I saw the wardrobe door twitch just a little, like someone had bumped it from the inside. My mouth went dry, and I gripped the knife harder, telling myself I was being paranoid. But then that giggle came back soft, high, drifting out from somewhere in the room. It wasn't in my head this time. It was real, and it was close, and I knew right then that whatever I'd run from at the Wheatsheaf had followed me home. That giggle sent a jolt through me, and I backed up fast, slamming into the bedroom wall hard enough to rattle the picture frame above my bed. It was I knew. It, the little girl from the pub, that pale figure with the dark hair. And now she was here, in my flat, screwing with me. The butter knife felt useless in my hand, like waving a twig at a storm. But I held it up anyway, my voice cracking as I yelled, "Who's there? Get out!" The giggle stopped, but the silence was worse, thick and heavy, like the air was holding its breath. I stared at the wardrobe, waiting for it to move again, my eyes burning from not blinking. The cold was biting now, my fingers numb around the knife, and that smoky, earthy smell was everywhere, choking me like it had followed me straight from West Boldon. I took a shaky step forward, thinking maybe I'd open the wardrobe and prove it was nothing, but my gut screamed at me to run instead. The bulb in the hallway flickered, casting jumpy shadows across the room, and I swear I saw something dart past the doorway, small, quick, like a kid running by. I couldn't take it anymore. I lunged for the wardrobe, yanking the door open, half expecting her to be standing there, staring up at me. But it was just my jackets and a pile of old shoes, nothing else, and I let out this shaky laugh, feeling like an idiot. The relief didn't last. Right as I turned away, the water glass on my nightstand slid off on its own, hitting the floor with a loud crash, water splashing everywhere. I jumped back, my heart pounding so hard it hurt, and saw the puddle spreading across the carpet. Way more water than that little glass could have held. The giggle came again, louder, right behind me, and I whipped around, but the room was still empty, just my bed, the wardrobe, and that damn flickering light. My breath was fogging up fast now, big clouds in front of my face, and I felt this pressure, like someone was standing too close, pushing against me. I stumbled out of the bedroom, slamming the door shut behind me, and ran back to the living room, my socks slipping on the floor. The knife clattered somewhere. I didn't care where, and I grabbed my phone, hands shaking so bad I could barely unlock it. I needed to call someone, anyone. But then I heard a low growl. "Get out!" rumbling through the walls of my own flat, and I knew I wasn't safe here either. That growl in my flat hit me like a truck, and I dropped my phone, the screen cracking as it bounced off the coffee table. It was the same voice from the Wheatsheaf, deep, rough, like it was scraped out of something dead-end. Hearing it here, in my own space, made my knees buckle. I fell back onto the couch, staring at the walls like they might start talking again, and the cold was everywhere now, seeping through the cushions, making my teeth chatter. The living room looked the same, my TV in the corner, the empty beer bottle on the table, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like the pub had stretched itself all the way to my doorstep. That giggle piped up again, faint and teasing, coming from the kitchen this time, and I could hear little taps like tiny footsteps running across the tiles. I wanted to scream, to tell whatever it was to leave me alone, but my throat was locked up, and all I could do was sit there, gripping the couch, waiting for it to stop. The shadows on the walls were moving again, sliding toward me, and I swear I saw that handprint from the pub's bar top flicker on my table, just for a second, before it vanished. I forced myself to stand, my legs wobbly, and grabbed my jacket. Wasn't staying here? No way. Not with that voice, and that girl playing tag in my flat. I didn't even care where I'd go. I just needed out. The front door was only a few steps away, but it felt like miles, and every move I made, those taps in the kitchen got faster, like she was keeping pace with me. I reached for the doorknob, my hand shaking so bad I could barely turn it, and that's when the growl came back. Get out! Louder, angrier, shaking the whole room. The lights flickered hard, plunging me into dark for a heartbeat, and something slammed behind me aloud, like a cabinet door in the kitchen banging shut. I yanked the door open and stumbled outside, the evening air hitting me like a slap, warm and thick compared to the icy hell inside. I didn't look back, just ran down the steps, my breath hitching, and kept going until I hit the street, my socks soaking up dirt and gravel. The flat was quiet from out here, windows dark, like nothing was wrong, but I could still feel it, that weight, that cold, pressing on me like the Wheatsheaf had marked me, and I'd never shake it off. I stood there, panting, realizing I'd left my phone, my keys, everything, but going back wasn't an option, not then, not ever. Out on the street, I was a mess, socks soaked, no shoes, jacket halfen, and my breath coming out in ragged gasps like I'd just escaped a fire. The flat looked normal from the outside, just another brick box and a row of them, but I knew better. It was tainted now, like the Wheatsheaf had reached out and clawed its way into my life. The streetlights were buzzing on, casting this sickly yellow glow, and a couple of neighbors walking by gave me weird looks, probably thinking I was drunk or high. I didn't care, I just kept moving, heading nowhere, my hands stuffed in my pockets to stop them shaking. The warm air should have felt good, but it didn't. That cold from inside was still stuck to me, like a wet shirt I couldn't peel off. I could hear cars humming past, a dog barking somewhere, but it all sounded far away, drowned out by that giggle looping in my head and that growl telling me to get out. I kept glancing back at my flat, expecting to see Hertha girl standing at the window, but it stayed dark, silent, mocking me. My chest hurt, my scraped hands stung, and I realized I had no plan, just this blind need to keep running. I made it a couple blocks before I had to stop, leaning against a lamppost, my legs burning and my head spinning. The street was quieter here, just some old houses and a closed-up shop, and I tried to catch my breath, telling myself I was safe now, that it was over. But then I heard it a single, soft thud, like something heavy dropping, and it came from right behind me. I spun around, expecting the worst, but it was just the empty pavement, a crumpled soda can rolling in the breeze. My heart wouldn't slow down though, and that smoky smell was back, faint but sharp, curling up my nose like a reminder. I looked at my hands and saw they were trembling again, and there was this streak of white paint on my sleeve still, runny and cold to the touch, like it had followed me out here too. The giggle hit again, soft, almost playful, drifting from somewhere down the street, and I froze, my eyes darting around, trying to pin it down. Nothing, just shadows and parked cars. But I felt it, that same pressure from the pub, like something was standing too close, watching. I started walking again, faster, my socks tearing on the rough ground. And I knew then that leaving the flat didn't fix anything. Whatever was in the Wheatsheaf wasn't tied to a place, was tied to me now, and I had no idea how to make it stop. I kept walking, my socks shredded now, little rocks digging into my feet. But I didn't stop, not with that giggle still bouncing around in my head like a bad echo. The street stretched out ahead, lined with old houses and flickering streetlights. And I felt like a rat scrambling for a hole to hide in. Every few steps, I'd catch that smell against smoke and damp earth, faint but clinging to me, and it made my stomach churn. Like the Wheatsheaf was breathing down my neck. I didn't know where I was going. Mike's place was too far, and I didn't have my phone to call anyone else. The paint on my sleeve was still there, a cold, wet smear, and I tried rubbing it off, but it just spread, sticking to my fingers like glue. My chest was tight, my breath shallow, and I kept hearing those thuds like footsteps trailing me but every time I turned. The street was empty, just me and the shadows stretching too long under the lights. I told myself I was losing it, that it was all in my head, but deep down, I knew better. Something had latched onto me back at that pub, and it wasn't letting go. I ended up at this little park a few streets over, just a patchy bit of grass with a bench and a busted swing set, and I collapsed onto the bench, my legs giving out. The air was still warm, crickets chirping somewhere, but I couldn't shake that cold. It was in my bones now, making my joints ache. I sat there, head in my hands, trying to piece it together. The girl, the growl, the handprints, all of it. The Wheatsheaf wasn't just some creepy old building, it was a trap, and I'd walked right into it. I looked up, scanning the park, and that's when I saw Ida's shadow moving between the trees, tall and hunched, just like the one I'd glimpsed upstairs. My breath caught, and I squinted, trying to make it out, but it was gone as quick as it appeared, leaving me staring at nothing. The giggle came back, closer now, like she was sitting right next to me, and I jumped up, my heart hammering again. I could feel that pressure building, the air getting heavy, and the bench creaked like something had shifted its weight on it. I backed away, my eyes locked on the spot, and swore I saw the wood dent, just a little, before it went still. This wasn't over, it was following me, playing with me, and I didn't know how to outrun it. Sitting in that park, I couldn't sit still anymore, not with that bench creaking, and the shadows twitching like they had a mind of their own. I started pacing, my torn socks leaving little smears of dirt on the grass, and every rustle in the bushes made me flinch, thinking it was her or that tall thing coming for me. The giggle was gone for now, but the silence was worse. It felt like the calm before something awful, like the Wheatsheaf was winding up to hit me harder. That smoky smell stuck to me, mixing with the night air, and I kept rubbing my hands on my jeans, trying to get rid of that cold paint smear, but it wouldn't budge. It was like a mark, branding me. My head was a mess, jumping between running to a mate's house, calling the cops, or just hiding somewhere until morning. But none of it felt right wherever I went. I knew it'd find me. The streetlights buzzed overhead, flickering just enough to mess with my eyes, and I swore I saw that hunched shadow again, lurking at the edge of the park. But when I blinked, it was just a tree. My chest tightened, and I muttered to myself, "Get it together, you're fine." But I wasn't. Something was out there, and it was pissed. I decided to keep moving, heading toward the main road where there'd be more people, more lights maybe. That'd shake it off. My feet were raw now, stinging with every step, but I didn't care. I just needed noise, life, anything to drown out that growl still looping in my head. The park faded behind me, and I hit a busier streetcar zipping by. A couple of guys laughing outside a chip shop, but it didn't help. That cold was still there, wrapping around me like a fog, and I caught that giggle again, soft and quick, like she was skipping along beside me. I spun around, my fists clenched, yelling, "Leave me alone!" And the guys at the chip shop stared at me like I'd lost it. But I didn't. Kyra could feel her, that little girl, hovering just out of sight. The air got heavy again, pressing on my shoulders, and I stumbled, catching myself on a bin. That's when I saw Ida handprint, big and rough, smeared on the metal, just like the one from the pub's bar. My stomach dropped, and the growl rumbled low. "Get out!" Not loud this time, but close, like it was whispered right in my ear. I bolted, shoving past people, my breath hitching, and didn't stop until I hit a crowd near a bus stop, praying the noise would keep it away. But I knew it wouldn't. It was in me now, and I was running out of places to hide. I wedged myself into that bus stop crowd, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear the chatter around me, people talking about their day. A bus engine rumbling nearby, but it didn't matter. I still felt like a cornered animal. The cold was relentless, seeping through my jacket, and that handprint on the bin was burned into my brain, like the Wheatsheaf was leaving me little calling cards. I kept my head down, my scraped hands shoved deep in my pockets, and tried to blend in, hoping the bustle would drown out whatever was tailing me. The giggle came back, though soft, almost lost in the noise, but it was there, slipping between the voices like a needle in my ear. I scanned the crowd, my eyes darting from face to face, but no one else seemed to hear it, just me, sweating and shaking in the middle of normal life. That smoky smell was fainter now, masked by exhaust and fried food from the chip shop, but it was still on me, a reminder I couldn't shake. The bus pulled up, and I jumped on without even checking where it was going, just needed to keep moving, to outrun that growl, still whispering, "Get out," in the back of my skull. The bus was half full, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and I grabbed a seat near the back, slumping against the window as it lurched forward. My reflection stared back at me, Bill, sweaty eyes wild, and I looked like hell, like I'd just crawled out of a nightmare. The other passengers ignored me, scrolling on their phones or staring out into the dark, and for a second I thought maybe I'd dodged it, that the motion would shake whatever was clinging to me. But then the cold hit again, sharp and sudden, like someone opened a freezer door right behind me. My breath fogged up the glass, and I felt that pressure like a hand on my shoulder, heavy and mean. The giggle piped up, clear as day, coming from the empty seat next to me, and I whipped my head around, expecting to see her pale face, dark hair, but it was just a crumpled newspaper someone left behind. My hands clenched into fists, nails digging into my palms, and I muttered, "Stop it, please," under my breath, not caring if anyone heard. The bus jolted over a bump, and I heard that thud again, soft, like something dropping in the island. The lights flickered, just for a second. I knew then I wasn't safe here either. The Wheatsheaf wasn't a place, it was a curse, and I'd brought it with me. The bus kept rolling, but I couldn't relax. Every jerk and sway felt like something was testing me, waiting for me to crack. That cold was digging deeper, making my fingers ache, and I kept rubbing my hands together, trying to warm them up. But it was useless. The chill was inside me now, not just on my skin. The giggle had stopped, but the silence was heavy, like the air was thick with something I couldn't see. I glanced around the bus, my eyes jumping from the guys snoring to Rose up to the lady tapping her foot by the door. But no one else seemed off. They were just living their lives, while I was stuck in this hell. The window next to me was fogged up from my breath, and I wiped it with my sleeve. That paint smear still there, cold and sticky against the glass. That's when I saw it outside, in the dark between streetlights. A shadow keeping pace with the bus, tall and hunched, gliding along like it wasn't even touching the ground. My stomach flipped, and I pressed my face closer, squinting, but the next light hit, and it was gone, just a blur of houses and parked cars. I told myself it was my head playing tricks, but my gut knew better. It was him, the thing from upstairs, and he wasn't letting me go. I sank back in my seat, my heart racing, and tried to focus on the hum of the engine, the chatter up front, anything to ground me. Then the growl came back, low and rough. "Get out," right in my ear. I jumped, knocking my knee into the seat in front of me, and the guy there turned, giving me a dirty look. But I didn't, for I could feel it, that pressure, like someone was leaning over me, breathing that smoky stench down my neck. The lights flickered again, longer this time, and the bus went quiet. Everyone else froze too, like they felt something for a split second before shrugging it off. I didn't shrug it off. I knew what it was. The newspaper next to me shifted, just a little, like a breeze had caught it, but the windows were shut tight. My hands were shaking so bad I shoved them under my thighs, and I caught that giggle again, faint, coming from the front of the bus now, like she was hopping seats, playing with me. I wanted to scream, to tell the driver to stop, let me off, but my voice was gone, stuck somewhere in my chest. The bus slowed for a turn, and I saw that handprint smear across the window, big, rough, peering out of nowhere, and I knew I couldn't keep running. The Wheatsheaf was everywhere, and I was trapped in it. That handprint on the bus window was the last straw. Couldn't pretend anymore. Couldn't tell myself it was just my imagination running wild. It was real, smudged and wet, like someone had pressed their hand right there while I wasn't looking, and it sent this wave of panic crashing over me. I bolted up from my seat, my legs wobbly, and stumbled toward the front of the bus, muttering, "I need off, let me off," loud enough that the driver shot me a look in the mirror. The other passengers stared too, some annoyed, some confused, but I didn't care. I could still hear that giggle trailing me, bouncing between the seats, and that growl was simmering in my ears. "Get out!" like it was daring me to try. The cold was suffocating now, my breath fogging up in big clouds, and that smoky smell was so thick I gagged on it. The driver hit the brakes at the next stop, and I practically fell out the door, hitting the pavement hard, my hands scraping fresh cuts into the old ones. I didn't look back, just scrambled up and ran, the bus's engine fading behind me as I darted down a side street, my socks barely holding together. The street was narrow, lined with shuttered shops and flickering lamps, and I kept going, my chest burning, my feet screaming from the rough ground. I didn't know where I was, just some random corner of town, but it didn't matter. I had to keep moving, had to outrun that shadow, that girl, that voice. The air was warm out here, sticky with late-day heat, but the cold clung to me, making my teeth chatter, even as sweat dripped down my back. I ducked into an alley, hoping the tight space would hide me, and leaned against a brick wall, gasping for air. The giggle hit again close, too close, like she was standing at the alley's mouth, and I pressed myself harder against the wall, my heart hammering so fast I thought it'd burst. That tall shadow flickered at the edge of my vision, just beyond the dumpster, and I squeezed my eyes shut, muttering, "Go away, please, go away," like that'd do anything. The growl rumbled back, "Get out," low and mean, vibrating through the bricks, and something thudded nearby, like a trash can tipping over on its own. I opened my eyes, and there it was, a handprint on the wall, right next to my head, fresh and dripping, like it had been waiting for me to look. I screamed then, a raw, broken sound, and ran again, knowing I couldn't escape it. The Wheatsheaf had me, and it wasn't letting go. I ran out of that alley like a bat out of hell, my voice still echoing from that scream, and I didn't care who heard me I was past pretending I had it together. The handprint on the wall was seared into my head, dripping like it was alive, and I could still feel its wet chill on my fingers, even though I hadn't touched it. The street opened up ahead, some rundown part of town with boarded up windows and cracked pavement, and I kept going, my feet bleeding through my torn socks, every step a stab of pain. That giggle chased me, skipping along like she was having fun, and the growl was constant now. "Get out," rumbling under my skin like a second heartbeat. The cold was unbearable, my breath puffing out in frantic clouds, and that smoky, earthy stink was everywhere, coating my throat, making me cough. I tripped over a loose brick, crashing to my knees, and just stayed there for a second, hands on the ground, gasping, feeling like I was drowning in it all. The shadows around me twisted, stretching toward me like claws, and I knew I was losing. Whatever was in the Wheatsheaf wasn't just following me, it was breaking me. I dragged myself up, my jeans ripped at the knees, now, and staggered toward a streetlight, its weak glow buzzing like a dying bug. I needed light, people, something to snap me out of this. But the street was dead, no cars, no voices, just me and whatever was hunting me. The giggle got louder, right behind me, and I spun around, fists up, yelling, "What do you want?" But it was just empty air, a flickering lamp, and a pile of trash bags. My voice bounced off the buildings, sounding small and desperate. And that's when the thud hit loud, like something heavy slamming into the ground, shaking the pavement under my feet. The growl roared back, "Get out," so close I felt it in my chest, and the streetlight flickered out, plunging me into dark. I stumbled back, my hands out, feeling for anything to hold on to, and brushed something cold, wet paint, streaking across a shop window, forming another damn handprint. My stomach lurched, and I ran again, blind, my lungs burning, tears stinging my eyes. I didn't know where I was going, just away, anywhere, but it was no use. The Wheatsheaf was in my head, my skin, my breath, and I was starting to think I'd never get free. Running through that dark street, I was a wreck, my lungs screaming, my feet shredded, and my mind spinning so fast I couldn't think straight. The handprint on the shop window was still flashing in my head, wet and cold, like it was laughing at me, and that giggle was everywhere now, behind me, beside me, above me alike. She was circling, closing in. The growl kept pounding, "Get out!" Each word a kick to my ribs, and the cold was so deep I could barely feel my hands anymore, just numb stubs clawing at the air. I tripped again, slamming into a rusted fence, and just clung there, panting, my forehead pressed against the metal, trying to hold on to something real. That smoky smell was choking me, thick and bitter, and the shadows around me were alive, twisting, reaching, like the Wheatsheaf had sent them to drag me back. I muttered, "I'm out, I'm gone, leave me alone," my voice hoarse and broken. But it didn't stop. The thud came again, closer, like footsteps stomping right up to me. And I felt that pressure, heavy and mean, pushing me down. I slid to the ground, my back against the fence, and just sat there, too tired to run anymore. The street was pitch black now, no lights, no sound except my ragged breathing and that damn giggle, teasing me like a kid with a toy. I hugged my knees, rocking a little, trying to block it out. But then the growl hit hard. Get out, so loud it rattled my teeth, and something slammed into the fence right above my head. I yelped, scrambling sideways, and saw it a dent in the metal, fresh and deep, like a fist had punched it from the other side. My heart was racing, my eyes darting around, and that tall shadow was back looming at the end of the street, hunched and still, just watching. The giggle turned into a laugh, sharp and cruel, and I felt something brush my arm, cold, wet, like paint dripping off me, and I looked down to see streaks of white running down my jacket, pooling on the ground. I screamed again, kicking at it, and bolted up, running blind. My socks gone now, just bare feet slapping the pavement. The cold was a vice around my chest, the smell a gag in my throat, and I knew I couldn't fight it. Whatever was in the Wheatsheaf had me, and it was tearing me apart, piece by piece, with no way out. I ran until my legs gave out, my bare feet bloody and raw, and I collapsed in the middle of that empty street, sprawled out on the cracked pavement like roadkill. The giggle was relentless now, looping around me, and that shadow at the end of the road didn't move, just stood there, tall and hunched, a black smear against the dark. My chest heaved, every breath a stab of pain, and the cold was so bad I couldn't feel my toes anymore, just this numb, creeping freeze taking over. That growl rumbled again, get out, low and steady, like it was taunting me, knowing I had nowhere left to go. The smoky smell was suffocating, mixing with the coppery temps of my own blood, and those white paint streaks were all over me now, in my hands, my jeans, my face, like I'd been marked for good. I tried to crawl, dragging myself a few inches, but the thud started up slow, heavy, like boots stomping closer, and I could feel the ground shake under me. I looked up, tears blurring my eyes, and saw that shadow shift, taking a step, then another, and the giggle turned into a scream, not mine, hers sharp and echoing, like she was right in my ear. I rolled onto my back, staring up at the sky, no stars, just a blank, black nothing, and I was done, too wrecked to move, too scared to care. The shadow loomed closer, its edges blurry but solid, and I could smell it now, not just smoke and earth, but something sour, like rot, hitting me hard. The growl was a roar, get out, shaking my bones, and the thud stopped, replaced by this awful silence that pressed down on me, heavier than ever. I felt something wet drip onto my face, cold, thick, like paint, and I wiped at it, my hand coming away white, streaked with red from my cuts. The scream faded, and that giggle came back, soft and close, like she was leaning over me, her breath on my neck. I squeezed my eyes shut, whimpering, please, stop. And the pressure hit hard, like hands pinning me down, crushing my chest. I couldn't breathe, couldn't scream, just lay there, trapped, while the shadow towered over me, its shape sharpening into something human, but wrong, too tall, too bent, too angry. The Wheatsheaf wasn't just a place anymore, it was this thing, this force, and it had me right where it wanted me, breaking me down until there was nothing left. Lying there on the pavement, pinned by that invisible weight, I was sure it was over. Whatever was in the Wheatsheaf was done playing and ready to finish me off. The shadow hovered right above me, so close I could feel its cold radiating down. And that growl, get out, wasn't just sound anymore. It was inside me, vibrating through my skull, my ribs, my guts. The giggle was gone, replaced by this low, raspy breathing, like something old and broken was sucking air right over my face. My eyes were still shut tight, but I could picture it, that tall, hunched thing, its arms too long, its head tilted like it was studying me. The paint kept dripping, splattering my cheeks, my neck cold and wet, and I couldn't move to wipe it off. My arms were locked, heavy as stone, pressed into the ground. That rotten smell was overwhelming, gagging me, and I felt something brush my hand fingers, maybe bony and icy, curling around mine for a second before letting go. I wanted to scream, to beg, but my voice was gone, swallowed by the panic clawing up my throat. This was it. The Wheatsheaf had chased me down, cornered me, and now it was taking me apart. Then the pressure shifted, not lighter, but sharper, Like a knife digging into my chest end, my eyes flew open, gasping for air. The shadow was still there, inches away. But it wasn't just a shape anymore. I saw it, clear as day. A face twisted and dark, eyes hollow but burning, staring right through me. My scream finally broke free, raw and loud, and the thing flinched, just a twitch, like I'd startled it. The growl roared back, "Get out!" so loud my ears rang, and the paint on my face started to burn, stinging like acid, making me thrash against the ground. The raspy breathing got faster, and that little girl's scream cut through again, overlapping the growl, desperate and shrill, like she was trapped too. The shadow lunged closer, its hands sore, what looked like hands reaching, and I kicked out, my bloody feet slipping, trying to get away. The cold was unbearable, my vision blurring, and I felt it grab me, not my body, but something deeper, like it was clawing into my head, my thoughts, pulling at me. I screamed again, flailing, and then nothing. The weight lifted, the growl cut off, the shadow vanished, and I was alone, sprawled on the pavement, sobbing and shaking, with no clue what the hell just happened. When that shadow disappeared, it was like someone hit the mute button. Everything just stopped, and I was left there, sprawled on the cold pavement, sucking in air like I'd forgotten how to breathe. My whole body was trembling, my face sticky with paint and tears, and that burning sting was fading, leaving my skin raw and tender. The street was dead quiet. No growl, no giggle, no thuds, just the faint hum of a car somewhere far off, and the buzz of a streetlight flickering back on. I rolled onto my side, curling up, my bloody feet throbbing, and just stared at the ground, waiting for it to come back, for that shadow to grab me again. But it didn't. Nothing moved, nothing breathed, and the cold started to ease up, like the air was letting me go. My hands were still streaked with white, my jacket a mess, and that smoky smell lingered, faint now, like a memory I couldn't shake. I didn't get it. Why'd it stop? What the hell was that thing? I wiped my face, smearing the paint, and sat up slow, my head pounding, my chest tight, feeling like I'd been chewed up and spit out. I stayed there for what felt like forever, just breathing, watching the shadows, too scared to move in case it triggered something again. The streetlight glowed steady now, casting a weak circle around me, and the night felt normal. Crickets chirping, a breeze rustling some trash, but I wasn't buying it. I knew what I'd seen, what I'd felt. That tall thing, the girl, the growl, they were real, and they'd come from the Wheatsheaf, chased me all the way here, and then just stopped. My hands shook as I touched my chest, where that pressure had pinned me, and it ached, like I'd been punched hard. I looked around, half expecting to see a handprint on the pavement, but there was nothing, just me, a wrecked mess, sitting in the middle of nowhere. I started crying again, quiet this time, not even sure why, just relief, maybe, or terror that it wasn't really over. I dragged myself to my feet, wincing at the pain, and limped toward the light, not sure where I was going, just knowing I couldn't stay there. The Wheatsheaf had let me go, for now, but it didn't feel like a win. It felt like a pause, and I had no idea what came next. I limped down that street, every step a jolt of pain through my torn-up feet, but I kept moving, needing to get somewhere, anywhere that wasn't just me in the dark. The streetlight behind me buzzed, steady now, and the air was warm again, sticking to my sweaty skin, but I could still feel that cold lurking, like it was waiting to creep back in. My jacket hung off me, heavy with paint and dirt, and my hands wouldn't stop trembling, clutching at nothing. That smoky smell was fainter, just a whiff now and then, but it was enough to keep my stomach twisted up, reminding me of the Wheatsheaf and that thing that had pinned me down. I didn't know where I was, some back road houses, dark and quiet, but I spotted a phone box up ahead, its glass scratched and grimy, glowing faintly under a flickering bulb. My flat was out of the question. Mike was too far, but I needed someone, anyone, to pull me out of this. I stumbled toward it, my breath ragged, and fumbled in my pocket. It's empty, no coins, just lint and that damn paint streaking my fingers. I leaned against the box, forehead on the cool glass, and tried to think, but my head was a fog of fear and exhaustion. I don't know how long I stood there, just breathing, trying to piece together what the hell had happened, why it started, why it stopped, but nothing made sense. The growl, the girl, that shadow, they'd come out of nowhere, torn me apart, and then vanished, leaving me like this, a shaking, bloody mess with no answers. The phone box smelled like piss and old cigarettes, but it was solid, real, and I clung to that, needing something to hold on to. My chest still ached where that pressure had crushed me, and my face stung where the paint had burned. But I was alive somehow. I was still here. I slid down to the ground, sitting with my back against the glass, and stared at my hands, the white streaks mixing with dried blood. That giggle flashed in my mind, soft and cruel, and I flinched, waiting for it to come back. But the night stayed quiet, no thuds, no voices, just the distant hum of life somewhere else. I hugged my knees, rocking a little, and muttered, "It's over, it's done," trying to convince myself, but I didn't believe it. Not really. The Wheatsheaf had let me go, sure, but it felt temporary, like it had dropped me just to pick me up again later, and I couldn't shake that dread gnawing at me. Sitting there against that phone box, I felt like a ghost myself, beat up hollow, just waiting for the next hit. The street was still. No cars, no people, just the faint rustle of leaves skittering across the pavement in the breeze. My feet were a mess, throbbing and sticky with blood, but the pain was dull now, drowned out by this numb buzz in my head. That cold was finally fading, letting the night's warmth creep back in, and the smoky smell was barely there, just a trace, like a bad dream I couldn't fully wake up from. I kept staring at my hands, the paint streaks cracking as they dried, and wondered if I'd ever get them clean, if I'd ever scrub the Wheatsheaf off me for good. The phone box light flickered above, casting jumpy shadows, and I tensed every time, expecting that giggle or that growl to break the silence. But it didn't. Just me and my ragged breathing, alone for the first time in hours. I leaned my head back, the glass cooled against my skull, and tried to figure out what to do next, where to go. Who to tell, but my brain was too fried to land on anything solid. After a while, I heard footsteps, real ones. Not the heavy thuds from before, and I froze, my heart kicking up again, ready to bolt. But it was just some guy, an older bloke in a coat, shuffling by with a bag of takeaway, not even glancing my way. He passed under the streetlight, his shadow stretching normal and human, and I let out a shaky breath, almost laughing at how jumpy I was. The world was still here, ticking along, while I'd been running from something that didn't even make sense. I watched him disappear around the corner, and the quiet settled back in, heavy, but not threatening, just empty. My chest loosened a bit, and I wiped my face, the paint flaking off in little bits, sticking to my fingers. I didn't feel safe, not really, but I wasn't running anymore, couldn't, even if I wanted to. The Wheatsheaf had chased me halfway across town, torn me up, and then just stopped, like it had gotten bored or proved its point. I didn't get it, still don't, and that's what kept me there, slumped against the phone box, too wrecked to move, wondering if it had come back or if I'd finally slipped free. Either way, I wasn't the same guy who'd walked into that pub that morning, and I knew I never would be. That phone box was my anchor for a bit, just sitting there, letting the night roll over me while I tried to pull myself together. The guy with the takeaway was long gone, and the street stayed empty, just me and the flickering light above, buzzing like it was on its last legs. My feet were killing me, crusted with dirt and blood, and I knew I'd have to deal with them soon. But I couldn't move yet, too drained, too spooked. The paint on my hands was drying into a crusty mess, flaking off when I rubbed them together, and I kept sniffing the air, half expecting that smoky stench to flare up again. But it was mostly gone, just a faint whiff now, like an aftertaste. My head was clearer though, the panic easing into this dull, gnawing unease that wouldn't let go. I kept replaying it, all the girl, the shadow, that growl, and it felt realer than ever, but also like it had happened to someone else, like I was watching it from the outside. The Wheatsheaf had let me loose, sure, but it didn't feel done. It was like it had stepped back to watch me squirm, waiting for me to slip up. I finally pushed myself up, wincing as my feet hit the ground, and leaned on the phone box, testing my weight. The street stretched out both ways, dark and quiet, and I had no clue where I was, just some nowhere corner, miles from anything familiar. My flat was a no-go, locked up with all my stuff inside, and I didn't have a phone or cash to call anyone. I thought about Mike, wondering if he'd made it home okay, or if he was freaking out too. But I couldn't get to him, not like this. The night air was thick, pressing on me, and I started limping toward the main road, figuring I'd flag someone down or find a shop still open. Every step hurt, my socks just bloody scraps now, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting that shadow to pop up or that giggle to start again. But it was just me alone, for real this time. The Wheatsheaf had backed off. No more thuds, no more voices, but that didn't mean I was free. It felt like it had left a piece of itself in me. This cold, knot in my gut I couldn't shake. I didn't know if it had come back or when, but I knew one thing: I'd never set foot in that pub again. Not for all the cash in the world. Limping down that street, I felt like a stray dog beat up lost, just trying to find somewhere to lick my wounds. The main road wasn't far. I could hear the faint hum of traffic now, see a glow of lights cutting through the dark hand. It gave me something to aim for, a lifeline to cling to. My feet were screaming, every step a jolt of pain, but I kept going, my breath steadying a little, the panic fading into this shaky, worn-out haze. The paint on my hands was mostly dry now, cracking off in little flakes, and I rubbed at it absently, like it'd erase what happened if I got it all off. That smoky smell was barely there, just a ghost of itself, and the air felt normal again, warm, sticky, with a hint of exhaust rolling in from the road. No giggles, no growls, no shadows, just the night. Quiet and still, letting me breathe for the first time in hours. I didn't trust it, though. The Wheatsheaf had pulled this trick before, going silent just to mess with me, and I wasn't ready to call it quits yet. I kept moving, slow and sore, toward the lights, needing people, noise, anything to keep it away. I hit the main road a few minutes later, and it was like stepping into another world. Cars zipping by, a late-night kebab shop glowing across the street, a couple of drunk guys yelling at each other down the block. It was messy, loud, alive, and I just stood there, soaking it in, my bloody feet planted on the curb. A truck roared past, its headlights flashing over me, and I flinched, half expecting that shadow to lunge out of the glare. But it didn't. Just tires on asphalt, normal as hell. I limped toward the kebab shop, the smell of grease and meat hitting me hard, and it was the first thing that didn't make me gag all day. The guy behind the counter barely looked up as I stumbled in, muttering something about needing to use the phone, and he waved me toward a sticky old handset by the register. My hand shook as I dialed Mike, the only number I could remember, and it rang once, twice, 3 times before he picked up, his voice groggy but real. "You okay?" he asked, and I almost laughed, my throat tight, because I didn't know how to answer that. The Wheatsheaf was quiet for now, but I wasn't Okanot, even close-in. I wasn't sure I ever would be. Standing in that kebab shop, the phone pressed to my ear. I felt like I'd crawled out of a hole. Mike's voice was the first solid thing I'd grabbed onto all day. I mumbled something like, "I'm alive, just come get me," my words slurring from exhaustion. And he didn't ask questions, just said, "Where you at?" in that gruff way he does when he's worried but won't admit it. I told him the shop's name, some greasy joint called Ollie's Kebabs, and he grunted, "Stay put, I'm coming," before hanging up. I slid the phone back, my hands leaving faint paint smudges on it, and sank onto a plastic chair by the window, my feet throbbing so bad I could barely feel them anymore. The shop was warm, buzzing with fluorescent lights and the sizzle of meat on the grill, and it should have felt safe, but I kept glancing outside, watching the road, waiting for that shadow to slide into view. The guy at the counter tossed me a water bottle. No charge, probably because I looked like Death Bloody. Paint-streaked eyes, wild, and I chugged it, the cold stinging my raw throat. The Wheatsheaf was miles away now, silent, but I could still feel it like a weight in my chest, a whisper in my head, waiting. Mike showed up about 20 minutes later, his van screeching to a stop outside, and I hobbled out to meet him, the pavement rough under my wrecked feet. He looked me over, his face tight, and just said, "Bloody hell, mate," before helping me into the passenger seat. The van smelled like cigarettes and old tools, familiar and grounding, and I slumped there, my head against the window, as he pulled away. He didn't push me to talk, just drove the radio off, the hum of the engine filling the silent sand. I was grateful for it. I didn't have the words yet, didn't know how to explain the girl, the growl, the way that Pub had chased me down. My hands were still shaky, the paint flaking off in little curls, and I caught a whiff of that smoky stench, so faint I wasn't sure it was real. We passed dark streets, headlights flashing over us, and I kept my eyes open, half expecting that giggle to drift in, or that shadow to loom up. But it didn't. Just quiet. For now, the Wheatsheaf had stopped, let me go, and I didn't get why. Still don't. But as Mike drove me away, I knew it wasn't gone for good. It was just waiting, and I'd carry that fear with me forever. Riding in Mike's van, I just stared out the window, the town blurring past in streaks of light and shadow, my body too wrecked to move much. My feet were a mess, crusted with blood and dirt, and every bump in the road sent a jolt through me. But I didn't. Car I was out, away from that street, that pub, that thing. Mike kept his eyes on the road, hands tight on the wheel, and I could tell he was rattled. Too, his usual chatter was gone, replaced by this tense quiet that said more than words could. The paint on my hands was mostly dry now, peeling off like old skin, and I picked at it, watching the flakes fall onto my lap, trying to focus on anything but the memory of that growl. Get out, still echoing in my skull. The van's warmth was sinking in, thawing the cold that had gripped me all day, and that smoky smell was finally fading, lost under the stink of cigarettes and grease. I wanted to feel safe, to believe it was over, but deep down, I knew the Wheatsheaf wasn't done with, needed backed off. Sure, but it felt like a cat letting a mouse run just to catch it again later. We pulled up to Mike's Plaza, cramped flat above a shop, all cluttered with tools and empty beer cans, and he helped me inside, half carrying me up the stairs while I gritted my teeth against the pain. He dumped me on his couch, tossing me a blanket that smelled like motor oil, and grabbed a first aid kit to patch up my feet, muttering, "You're a state mate," like it was my fault. I didn't argue, just sat there, letting him wrap my cuts, my head leaning back as the day crashed over me like a wave. The girls giggle, the shadows stare, the handprints, they were burned into me, and I couldn't shake this feeling that I'd left something behind in that pub, or worse, brought something out with me. Mike handed me a beer, and I took it, my hands steadier now, but I didn't drink, just held it, staring at the can, wondering why it had stopped, why it let me go. The flat was quiet, just the hum of a fridge and the tick of a clock. And for the first time all day, nothing thudded, nothing growled. The Wheatsheaf was still out there, though, silent and waiting. And I knew I'd never walk past it again without feeling that cold, that fear, creeping back in. It was over for now, but not for good, Dad. That's the part I can't explain, even today. Sitting on Mike's couch, the blanket scratchy against my skin, I felt like I'd been spit out of a nightmare I couldn't quite wake up from. My feet were bandaged now, throbbing under the gauze, and the beer in my hand was getting warm. But I didn't care. Just having something to hold on to kept me from falling apart. Mike crashed in a chair across from me, lighting a cigarette, the smoke curling up toward the cracked ceiling, and he finally asked, "What the hell happened back there?" I tried to answer, my voice raspy and weak, but the words stuck. How do you explain a pub that chases you? A shadow that grabs you? A little girl's laugh that won't quit? I just shrugged, muttering, "It didn't want us there." And he nodded, like that made sense, even though it didn't, not really. The flat felt solid, lived in, with its mess of tools and old newspapers. But I kept waiting for that giggle to sneak in, for that growl to rumble through the walls. It didn't, though, just silence, heavy and strange, like the Wheatsheaf had hit pause and walked away. I stayed there that night, curled up on the couch, staring at the dark windows, too wired to sleep, but too beat to move. The paint was gone from my hands, scrubbed off in Mike's sink, but I could still feel it cold wet. Marking my hand, that smoky smell lingered in my nose, faint but stubborn. The day played over and over in my head. The footsteps, the handprints, that thing pinning me down. And then nothing, just me left shaking on the pavement. It stopped as quick as it started. No warning, no reason, and I've got no clue why I'm still here, why it let me go. Mike's snores filled the room, steady and normal. But I couldn't shake this itch that the Wheatsheaf was out there, waiting, its sagging roof, and peeling paint, hiding whatever it was that had torn into me. I pulled the blanket tighter, my chest still aching where it had pressed me down, and knew I'd never get answers, just this lingering dread, this feeling it had come back someday. It's been quiet since, but I don't trust it, and I never will. That's my story, believe it or not. I lived it, and I'm still not sure how.